Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Behind the Product. Today we are with Chris Geary, CEO and co-founder of BSD Education. Chris is a multi-entrepreneur that actually started his career in consulting. And when he was in consulting, he realized that, one of the big things that can be improved by tech in the world is actually the educational system. This educational system has been around, for more than 100 years. Most kids nowadays, will tell you that they bored at school, they feel that they lose their time. And I can relate to that, and all my team can also relate to that. As engineers, most of the time, we would often say that we learn most of our job on internet, And Chris got the idea of actually teaching coding to kids very early on in their school life, So they can be armed for the future, and have the skills to live and thrive in the technical world and in the tech world that we have today. So he designed a platform that teachers and students can use, to actually learn tech skills, And what's interesting with Chris is he built a platform with that two angles, the students and the teachers, because you realize that if you want to change that actual system, the actual school system, you need to focus by the teachers, because that's the teacher that are giving the skills, teaching the skills to the kids. So you need to be very focused on the teacher to actually make the change in that world. So without further ado, I'll let you discover the story of Chris, and I hope that you guys will enjoy it.
Firstly, to introduce myself, I'm Chris Geary. I'm the CEO and co-founder of BSD Education. I have been an entrepreneur at the beginning of my career, and I suppose nowadays I describe myself as more of a social entrepreneur. And so from being 22 years old up until today, I've always run my own businesses. And, I started off in kind of research and recruiting with large corporations. And that gave me a solid kind of, international perspective on business. The great thing about doing something in the area of consulting for your first business is you get to learn about a lot of different industries and what a lot of different types of business people do. And so actually, as a young entrepreneur, it may be counterintuitive, but consulting is actually quite a good route. And it also, I think, for anyone who's the same age as me, I'm 39 now, and all of my contemporaries, we all went through the global financial crisis when that arose. And, that was 4 or 5 years into our careers. And so you're at that point where you're just gaining momentum, and then you kind of hit this wall. And so I would say at that point, that provoked a lot of questions about, why do we do what we do? Why do we build businesses in the first place? And for me, the realization really was that it's not that money, of course, then is profitable. And I do believe in profitable companies. I'm not a huge believer in non-profitable companies, as in, I mean, unprofitable companies, not specifically the non-profit space. But at the same time, for me as well, it became the fact that what I really cared about at the bottom line of business, when I'm in the middle of the crisis, built something for 5 years, and then a lot of it has just been taken away in about a week. And actually, I cared about continuing with the business. I cared about continuing as an entrepreneur. Having made money, lost money, I didn't really care. And so for me, it was really the purpose in what I was doing. And then exploring that concept as I went through my late 20s, it became more and more important to me that I realized that it was actually the social purpose and the impact in what I was doing that really interested me and drove. And so
that's why you define yourself as a social entrepreneur now.
Exactly. That's why I define myself as a social entrepreneur now. So I've always been an entrepreneur, and I've always been an entrepreneur with for-profit business interests. Continue as an entrepreneur with for-profit business interests, but I always do that through a social and an impact-focused lens.
Okay, but don't you think it's the role of every entrepreneur to be social entrepreneur?
I think there's a big difference. A lot of people who talk about being a social entrepreneur, and as you go through that journey, it's there are levels of compromise that you make between your vision of impact and your vision of earning money. It doesn't mean to say that as a social entrepreneur, the two can't be harmonious, but the timescale to that might be different. The pathway might be harder. And so And I think the integrity of what we create as entrepreneurs is often something that I see many businesses, they start in one direction, and then perhaps the integrity of what they've created is something that is greatly sacrificed. And so, yeah, I think there's a fine line between talking the talk and walking the walk, like with many things in life, but particularly in building a business. I mean, you can argue that any company in the world that creates and provides employment has some form of social purpose, which is true. But we have to think about the balance of creating employment and then the positive or negative impacts in the rest of the world that our businesses create. And that's where those things aren't always balanced.
Yeah, sure. And so what is BSD Education now? What made
So,
you launch it?
After the financial crisis, actually, I moved my business interests from Europe back to Asia, and a research company back here, and that it was good to have that. That business was able to grow. I was able to work with my father's company here, which is in the recruiting industry, and also that gave me the space to look at other initiatives. And so my wife and I launched 2 jewelry companies together, which still run to this day. And then one of the things I came to observe across a number of different businesses, being at the intersection of research and recruiting and entrepreneurship, needing to hire, being a person who hires people as well, it became more and more apparent to me that we were seeking people with a profile that involved digital skills, and it was really, really hard to find people with the profile and the energy that we wanted. And so that's that kind of hard skill, soft skill combination. And those people just didn't exist. And, forward in terms of businesses, but it was getting harder and harder to find the talent to come along with us. And so at that point I said, it appears that there's an opportunity here. I'd come to know my co-founder, Nicky, at that time. He'd been working with Foundation as a digital consultant on an event that we used to run. And Nicky and I got talking about this whole concept of the digital skills gap. And then we all, it kind of makes sense that there's a digital skills gap, because when you look at education, no one who's in the workforce, and we're having these conversations in 2012, 2013, no one who's time had what you would consider to be a modern day, so call it a Web 2 or post Web 2 digital skills education. And when we looked at the schools at that time and in education, it still wasn't happening. So not only was there a gap, but the gap was getting bigger. I would argue that to this current day, it's just getting bigger and bigger still. And there are, a huge number of different reasons for that. And then when we think about the social purpose, one, obviously there's a headache for people who want to employ in not being able to find the right talent. But then when we look at, call it the societal impact underlying that, the long, call it macro challenge there is that people who have digital skills are going on an upward trajectory. People who don't have digital skills are being disintermediated from the workforce. And so we're sitting in 2013, 2014 with already major inequalities around the world. And actually this digital skills gap is something that can significantly exacerbate the inequalities that we're suffering from around the world. And so for us, it's about plugging a skills gap, but it's really in a broader purpose, it's about reducing inequality, giving more sit at the same table.
And so you guys launched, when did you guys launch?
So we started the business originally in May 2013, but we didn't start it as a product. We started it as a service company. And so when we stopped, yeah, exactly, like a coding school, because we really didn't know at that time what was the product-based solution. The challenge, what was the persona of the group of people that were going to call it on the receiving end of the solution, what age groups were really the age groups we were going to work with. We didn't know that. I mean, when we went to businesses at that point, it was just the very, very early days of what people are now calling digital transformation. And when we went to schools, people looked at us like we had three heads, and we were insane when we started talking about things like programming and, you know, artificial intelligence learning within the context of a school. Of course, nowadays it's more commonplace, but in those days it really wasn't. And so at the beginning, the outset of it was let's put some programs together or some courses together that are entry level. Let's take them to a range of different types of people. Let's teach different groups. And then let's, over a process of an unlimited amount of time, find out the create a meaningful solution. And so that's where, you know, we worked at that for a couple of years. And then in 2016, we saw really, okay, now we felt that the biggest gap, and I think this is really a big, still a big gap to this very day, was the fact that educators in the existing traditional system of education capability or capacity to teach digital skills. You know, and there isn't any content for digital skills to be taught in a way that is relevant and relatable to the real world. So, you know, IT as taught traditionally in school is not transferable to the real world. Many educators haven't worked in the real world. They went to school, they went to university, they went to school. So when we're asking even for the learning to be explained in the context of the real world, it's not an easy thing for a traditional educator. And so we've got this massive system that educates billions of children, in many cases is capable of educating children for free, but with zero capacity to deliver on the skill requirements for the workforce of the future. And so that was where we focused our solution in BSD on enabling educators of any level to, you know, with a minimum of training, but a high level of support to be able to teach digital skills to their students during lessons.
Okay, interesting. And so basically, how do you guys are doing it? It's more like a platform to train the teacher.
So what we've done is we've created a three-part solution. So part one really relates to that existing capacity of the educator and relates to the confidence of the educator. And actually, the most important thing for the confidence of the educator we found is to have, call it, a software tool that can enable the educator to curate the learning environment for the educator to feel in a position that they can understand what the students are learning and that they can challenge those students, and then they can deliver really strong learning outcomes. And so we created, the first part of the solution is our software platform. What goes hand in hand with that is the content. Now, if you think about a traditional subject, you think about mathematics or you think about geography, you know, these are topics that have been taught for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And so these are thousands of years of content in existence being used. Whereas when we think about modern day digital skills, there is no content, no tried and tested content, no validated research content. And if you go to an educator in a school and you think about the context of an educator and the amount of different demands they have on their time, it's also not reasonable to think, oh, well, we're going to create this pedagogical online environment and we're going to expect them to have the time and maybe the skills to create this content. And so we had to say, we also have to create the content. And, you know, anyone creating content is a big decision because, you know, as soon as you go into content, you've got version control, you've got testing. It's an entire another product effectively that you have to make alongside your existing software. So it's not a small decision to make. So we created the content, and we created the content in a basis that we can we call fully resourced. So what that means is it's ready to go off the shelf. So rather than saying, okay, we're going to give them something really simple, really needs to do an enhancement or needs to do a lot of editing with, we give every resource right from the beginning. So a teacher can use what we've given them off the shelf in the format that it comes for them. And then as teachers gain in confidence within our software platform, our pedagogical tool, they've got the ability to edit and adjust the content, and they can curate it a little bit more and personalize it for their students. And then the final part, which many products in education fall down on, the idea of how are you going to onboard this product into a school, or on how are you going to onboard an educator into your product. And if you're thinking again, if you're onboarding an educator, say a maths teacher onto a maths product, you're onboarding someone who already knows mathematics. Whereas we're onboarding teachers to a technology project who don't know technology. And for adults, when an adult learns, there's a significant cognitive load for an adult. And as an adult, we've also got loads of other things going on. We're worried about, you know, how our kids slept last night, how we slept last night, what we're going to eat, and the things that go on in our day-to-day lives. And so to actually do a lot of learning and as an adult is really hard. So how do we design an onboarding process where we can bring it with zero memorization, with minimum cognitive, the minimum amount of time, but then being sure that we excite or engage or motivate those educators so that when they come to use the product in 2 months or 3 months or 1 month or 6 months, it actually happened. And that's also a bit that we spent, you know, no less than 2-3 years, call it again, modifying, improving that part of our solution. And I would actually genuinely say nowadays, the way that we onboard, we then coach, we then support, we invest in a lot of human capital to do that, not just doing it with machines. And that has become a unique value of our approach to enabling educators versus other people in the market who've perhaps grown faster, who've perhaps grown bigger, but possibly don't deliver the depth of learning outcomes that our product and learning experience can deliver.
Okay, so you think like the unfair advantage of BSD is really like that human touch that you are able to add on top of the product?
Correct.
Okay, interesting. And what made you realize that? Your past career into research and
No,
recruitment and everything?
it was really you know, learning as we went along with the product. So you know, we were initially privately funded, and then we've been family office funded following. And so you know, we've always been blessed with very patient capital behind our growth of our organization to deliver upon the support and onboarding outcome with very aggressive venture capital. It would have been a very difficult marriage to maintain. And but we had the time to do it. And really, you know, another thing that you have to remember with educational products is you go through a cycle. So if you're working within the institutional space of education, it's not, you don't just do a iteration, because you do have a bit of a cycle. You've got like an annual cycle you're working with. So that slows things down as well. But we, you know, we focused very much on the loops within the product development cycle, the learning from the educators on the ground, and making sure that we timed the updates and the improvements of the product in the right way. You know, if you try and improve your onboarding and you put that into the market in April, you're going to get absolutely no understanding of how good it is or how bad it is. So at the end, you know, at the end of that, you've always got a narrow window within the year to do that. And so we had to learn about those things. But having been a teaching company for 3 years before then launching our product and gradually building it over a couple more years, we gave ourselves the time and the space to scale up the product in a way that we didn't lose the quality or integrity of the product along the way.
Yeah, because basically at the beginning, you guys started by services. You said something earlier about like the consultant, like starting a business in the consultancy field when you're a young entrepreneur. But basically,
Yeah,
yourself started in the service in the same industry that you're gonna build your product is actually very good because you learn basically what you learn the job, you learn the industry, you learn everything. So it's very good
exactly.
like know-how and like learning that you get and like that feed at the beginning the product development journey. Can you
And you know,
explain us? Yeah.
I'm also to add to that is I would say there's a lot of this maybe preconception for people going into entrepreneurship that it's about, you know, coming up with this huge idea and then raising loads of money and going really, really fast. Whereas, you know, I'm not a millionaire, and I you know, I don't have loads of money sitting behind me that I can just do what I want to do every day. I need to earn money, pay rent, and that. And so not going towards a product, going with a service, immersing in the industry, you can also earn money from a service quite quickly. So you can create a sustainable entrepreneurship journey for yourself with, you know, just a few hundred or a few $1,000s. You know, it doesn't have to be about millions of dollars. It doesn't also have to be about, you know, call it selling out the time that you want to take to think about your solution and think about what you're going to create and the business that you're going to build and the values that this, by pulling in large amounts of very demanding money at the beginning.
Yeah, sure. And when you launch like when you made the transition from the service to the product, can you tell us a bit how was that transition?
It's a
Going
nightmare.
from the
It's a nightmare. You know, and
yeah, but tell us about that because like it's service and product are two different worlds, you know. And
yeah,
and when you need to switch from one to another, obviously your revenue streams change. The work itself, like having some people that actually do some service, so like teach class and do that kind of thing. You need to like have them, you know, like building a product or change the people or change the team or like. Can you explain us a bit that transition?
yeah. And do you know, the
And
thing
what
is,
was the first version? And like, what was the first version you launched with actually the first version of the BSD education product?
yeah, and you know, really, it was, you know, when we started that product transition, we were still running as a service business. And, you know, from 2016 to 2018, we still ran as a service company. Even nowadays, we still have some service revenue, and we saw, you know, we've seen a different type of service demand arise. It's kind of a funny thing. You have service, then you launch product, and then off the back of product, often service opportunities and service lines kind of come back to you. But I think what's interesting, when we made that transition between being a service and a product, we were, you know, one of the things I think, you know, if I did it again in the future, we think a lot more about the communication about that journey that we're about to go on as a company. It's the temptation as a small business. You've got your product that you're about to go and you kind of run into it. Whereas I think there is some very unifying conversation amongst the people in your business that are then working on the product and people in your business that are working on the service. And, you know, one of the biggest things is, you know, the journey is always going to be bumpy. You're going to have things that you do right, things that you do wrong, etc. But
That's the life of
making sure
entrepreneurship.
that, yeah, but making sure that the people who are working with you all know what their role in that journey is, and all being understanding what journey is, I think really easy for the people. If you're like, oh, we're doing this new shiny product, and then you've got people working on the kind of the legacy service in the back of it, they might suddenly feel undervalued because, oh, it's all about this shiny product. And actually that's not the case, because it's like, no, you guys are the engine room and we're creating this product to then go to the next phase for the benefit of everyone. But that takes a lot of communicating. And I'm very aware that, you know, in BSD, we probably didn't do a hugely good job of that. You know, I don't think we started to do a good job in communication as a company probably until 2019, and we were already like 3 years into our product journey at that point. I think as well, you know, there are different ways that you can structure an organization, structure a business, structure the way that the finance flows between the service company and the product company, and I think it's worth spending time being creative with that, and not underestimating the value of that, because it will give you more flexibility down the road, and it can protect equity in different ways down the road, because there comes a point when the value of the service can be a drag on the value of the product, etc. And it's easier to do it at the beginning than it is when you're trying to unpick and change things. But I think bottom line with any of these things is once you're going into that service and the product, it's just being aware that the product will change direction constantly. And I think people will go a long way for you if they believe in what the product can deliver for the business. People will go a long way even to split what they're doing between the product and the service. People are adaptable like that, but it's really important to kind of communicate between them. Now, when we launched the product with BSD, the first thing we did was we launched the online software platform, because at the end of the day, the software platform was the newest piece of what we were building. And whilst there were third-party, call it programming editors in the market at the time, they really didn't achieve anything near to the type of scaffolded experience to be able to provide to an educator. So to really make it what we were doing very real, we prioritized the software development. And I would say if we did it again, we'd do that again. And then what we did off the back of that was, right at the early days, every school that we worked with, we were creating custom content for those schools. We were creating new content each time we got a new contract. That was a bit of a nightmare, but at the same time, it allowed us to kind of naturally iterate our content library within the software platform and develop our vision over the next 12 months about what the first actual version of that content library would look like. And so that was the way we went about that. And then obviously year one, we were just onboarding teachers and schools in in the best possible way we could. And then obviously once we got to the second year, we had call it a cohort of customers coming on board. And so we had to then learn about the difference in that onboarding process. But again, until we had a larger number, I don't think we would say we realized that in our solution, in our product, the value that the onboarding and the support would contain. I think we initially had the mind that would be, more of an additional piece, but it's really, really not in the education space. And so but again, that was only something that we could find out by listening to customers, taking customer feedback seriously. Having been educators ourselves, I think educator customers that we had were comfortable talking with us, were comfortable giving us that feedback. They knew and they trusted that we would value the feedback and the time that they spent with us, because we had also built a lot of those relationships through teaching alongside those people for a couple of years before we built the product.
And do you think what are the most important part in the success of BSD is the fact that you did some services before, or the fact that you were constantly looking for feedbacks from your user? What do you think in terms of the product roadmap had a huge impact? Your the biggest impact, your experience as a service, or that customer feedback and the fact that you were building the product with your customer at the beginning?
So I would say that up until 2019, the fact that we were listening to our customers, providing as fast as we could improvements based on the customer feedback, I think that was a really, really important piece, because it allowed us to develop, call it a much more advanced product than we possibly should have in the time that we were able to create it, particularly with the size of team that we had. I think we could have spent, we could have had to build with a much bigger team and put a lot more money into it if we didn't get the quality of feedback that we were able to get. Now, once we went after 2019 and we went into the current, call it global pandemic, the fact that we'd been a service business in the past, when we had you know, when we went into this environment where, you know, some of the markets slowed down a lot, you know, we also had a lot of experience on, okay, we can flip into service mode in certain markets, and we can pull revenue in through our service mentality. And there are people in the business still who were in that space back in the day, knew what we used to do there. And that's been hugely valuable in the last 2 years. Interestingly enough, it's also identified opportunities for us in the net. And, you know, we're seeing actually now as long-term quite strong growth areas. But, you know, I wouldn't underestimate the that kind of breadth of market experience helping us to be very adaptable to a very changing environment out in front of us. And so, you know, I would say different things have had different value propositions at different parts of the journey. But so you know, certainly no, I wouldn't regret any of those stages that we've been through. They've all come back and really earned their stripes as we've gone through the last couple of years.
Yeah, sure. And talking about like the crisis, like the recent COVID crisis and everything, that actually disrupt a lot like this like educational market where
Yeah.
like everyone has to teach online and everything. What do you think is the future of your market in the next like 10 years or something like that?
Well, you know, the last couple of years have been, obviously, we've seen a couple of things. One of the things that's big is it's really important in the last couple of years as an entrepreneur in the education space, you know, just not to think just because the press is reporting on big figures and billions of dollars in the venture capital market, that's something that's going to easily just apply to your company, because that's not the case. And, you know, and let's be honest, the media, when it comes to reporting about venture deals, they follow the big shiny object. The reality is that what the media and the people that are writing in the media don't have the first clue about the realities of actually running a business. And a lot of them have never done that. And so in that perspective, it's important, I think, leading an organization to ignore a lot of that crap in the market and really focus on what's actually happening in our industry. Now, the truth of the education industry is we've seen in an industry that has said for many years that any form of change takes time. We've seen the most red brick, the stiffest part of that industry have to change quickly. So what a moment of truth in the education world, where it's like the education world has shown that it can adapt. It's shown that it can adopt. And so, you know, during the last 2 years, whilst there has been an adaptation and adoption, there are still many, many constraints to a true revolution in education. And what I mean by that is, you know, education is still very hamstrung by the vested interests of large institutions, traditional modes of assessment. You know, the simple idea that for anything that you learn to actually be viewed as showing your suitability, you have to complete, which is complete crap. You know, we learn something in every moment of every day. To think that I have to complete a course for the journey of learning that I go through in that course to be worth anything is total rubbish. No, it's even total rubbish that they think people actually finish anything nowadays. The whole idea of business practice nowadays is to launch and then adapt, is to launch and iterate and to improve. It's never to complete. Nothing is finished now. So, and that's an aspect of education, a major encumbrance to its development. So, you know, what does that mean? All of that means is that education has nowhere to hide now. Having shown that it can adapt, it needs to adapt. It's getting more money to move things forward. And so you're still gonna hear cracks and moans as the ship turns. But, you know, I think at least the last 2 years have been something of a catalyst. You know, I don't think you're going to sit here and look in 24 months time and see the world of education as something that, you know, when you compare other industries, is going to be remarkably different to what it is today. But if you look at it in 5 years time, I think you will see significant changes. And if we hadn't had the pandemic, that 5 years could have been 25 years.
Yeah, sure. COVID made like a lot of people realize a lot of things.
Yeah,
And
it made a lot of people realize, but it also broke a lot of organizations that were doing really good work. Because the thing is, a lot of the new work in education is supplementary. But what students get examined in on education, which is the old world of education, is seen as core. And so a lot of the technology adoption that occurred last 2 years has funneled towards supporting core learning rather than supporting supplementary learning. Supplementary learning is the learning that prepares students for the real world. Core learning is the learning that prepares students for 1950. And so what we have in that at the moment is we have really strong positives in adaptability. We've seen adoption of technology. We've seen lots of good things, but we haven't seen it across that spectrum. And I could honestly, you know, and I'm not going to continue on that theme, but it's something that we, you know, that it's a very detailed theme. And that's an area that, you know, that's a huge topic in the education world. It's been a topic for a while, but it's going to heat up. That is going to heat up big time in the next 5 years. You'll see a lot in the education world in the coming years about, you know, you're already hearing stuff about skilling. Yeah. The problem is all the conversation about skillings have been actually going on for like a decade. Yeah. So a lot of people have just come to the skilling party because they've read TechCrunch in the last year and they've decided to get on the bandwagon. But the reality is that that conversation has been happening for a decade. What's not happened in that conversation and what's new is talking about the relationship between skills and opportunities. Because skilling people doesn't mean connecting people with opportunities. And we're also going to have to, if we are going to connect people with opportunities, we're also going to have to answer some tough questions about elitism, about nepotism, about inequality, about genuinely creating a more equal access, and also for people to finally admit that all degrees are complete rubbish. And that outside of certain specialized disciplines, many people could have much more choice in the world if they were given more freedom as to how people assessed the learning that they have. And so, you know, those are big questions, but there's a huge momentum behind answering those, coming to terms with some of that, and then really providing a real marriage between skills and opportunities for the future.
yeah, sure. And talking about learning and everything, what are your top 3 tips for entrepreneurs that want to launch a new product, launch a new company, launch a new product? The 3 top one that comes out of your mind.
So I think the first one is really think about, do you really care about the idea that you're launching? Because you're going to be told by people who like you, people who love you, that it's a really bad idea. And if you are wrong, they're all going to tell you that they told you so. So, but you've got to be willing to kind of fight for that product and drive that product. And so the first thing I think is just make sure that you really believe, you really care about what it's going to do. I think the second thing is don't worry so much about the money. Don't worry so much about, you know, obviously we've all got our responsibilities. And so I'm not saying be reckless, but what I'm saying is, you know, it's don't be afraid to really think about an idea, talk about a big idea. You know, don't worry about having the money in your pocket for that. It's because the thing is, if you've got a big idea and you're very passionate about it and it's a really good idea, don't hide it, share it with lots of people, start making some positive steps towards it, because sometimes people, the person that's going to back you, they just want to see that you've had the balls to take the first baby step towards your vision, because there's nothing less motivating for a partner or an investor if you're talking about this big idea, but you've not even taken a baby step towards what you're going to do. Because as soon as you take that little step, then you're in. Doesn't matter if you're not financially in, on the that it is something that you care about, you're emotionally in. So you are invested. And then the final thing I would say, and this relates to that emotional investment and everything else, is be prepared psychologically. Be prepared to hit really low lows. Be prepared to understand what are you willing to sacrifice to make your vision a reality, and who are the people, if it doesn't go right, that you're going to look in the eye, and you're still going to have the pride about the journey that you went on. And if you're taking a risk, it's fine taking big risks. If you talk with the people that you care about and that care about you, the risks that you're taking, acknowledge those risks, because I think that the psychological impact of entrepreneurship is something that we underestimate. And there are probably millions of incredible entrepreneurs that have maybe gone by the wayside because they had such a negative psychological impact of a failed idea or a failed venture that they didn't get back on the horse. And if they had got back on the horse, maybe, venture would have been incredible, and so I think that's a piece. And the self-esteem that people should have when they're taking that step and putting themselves out there should not be underestimated. They should be proud to be taking those steps, win, lose or draw. So things I would really say are important. The rest of it's, you don't need to be qualified, you don't need to be skilled.
You learn it along the way.
Yeah, you figure that out, other stuff out as long as you go along the way.
Yeah, sure. I really agree with like the steps and taking the baby steps and go on that, because actually like doing makes, it makes you learning, it makes you like, like building and refining your vision and everything. It's not by just thinking about your thing that it's gonna happen, like you just need
Exactly
to do it,
Yeah, and it's so many people who, people might be sitting there and they might be 55 years old, 60 years old and thinking, oh, it's, I haven't got time, it's too late. It's like, well, actually, if you're trying to do something, you're 55 years old, you're 60 years old, you can afford to take baby steps. Human beings on average globally live to 78. 18 years is loads of time. You do 3 businesses in 18 years.
Yeah.
Start and stop. And so, it's never too late. There's never anything that really says you have to rush.
Yeah, sure.
Never have to rush.
Sure. That's cool. And maybe to close that podcast on a more funny touch, can you give us 2 truths and 1 lie about your journey at BSD? Can be about the product, about the team, about everything. 2 truths, 1 lie, but do not tell us what are the truths and what are the lie. We'll let the listener guess that.
Okay, 2 truths and 1 lie. So in BSD, God, what are the truths? It's easier to do the lies. Let me think about that. Well, that's a really interesting. Yeah, I would say, something about BSD. Well, the key thing that I think really holds people together in BSD is the culture of the business.
Okay.
We've taken our time to focus on the culture. And, I think people who are in BSD, they could work other places, they can make more money elsewhere. But I think, we've got a team that is together behind that product, and they're there because it's something that they want to be doing. Another fact about BSD is, within BSD, when we look at the way that the business is operated, anyone who comes in BSD will always come to me for the operation. Yeah, they'll always come to me to know what is the structure behind what we're doing. And I think it's really important to have that person. And, in BSD, I'm the kind of the right person for that. And then the final thing is that yeah, you know, we've seen in the last kind of couple of years, we've seen businesses raising, call it hundreds of millions of dollars. They've made this impact of, you know, what, like 20, you know, they've had 20 customers and they've raised $20 million kind of thing. And one of the things with BSD, we've been able to, you know, raise less than $4 million US, grow to 16 countries, work with over 70,000 kids, you know, in the product. And so, you know, you can grow a business and you can be scrappy at the same time.
That's good. That's good to trust online, man. Very good one. Do you have anything else to add? Do you want to? I don't know. If you need to pass a message. You are hiring some people. You look for certain stuff, certain partners. Just like it's your time.
Well,
Go
you
for
know,
it.
one of the things actually at the moment with BSD, a couple of things we are doing. We are building out our team in the Philippines at the moment. So if there are people who listen to this podcast and are in the Philippines and are interested in working with BSD, and we've got a range of positions coming up there, so please do reach out to us. At the same time, we are, you know, now we've got to a certain scale and we've worked across a lot of different demographics. So we are also going to be driving a stronger research focus and almost to some extent a dedicated research focus within BSD in the coming year. And so where organizations are looking to partner on specifically about initiatives for social impact around digital skills, around connecting digital skills and opportunity, about looking at the data of learning and how that data arises, then we would love to connect with institutions, universities, or philanthropic foundations or social impact foundations to drive research in the area of digital skills and opportunities.
Okay. I hope someone can relate to that, man.
Yeah. Who knows? Who knows who's listening?
That's why this time is for you. Is to yeah. Thanks, man. It was actually great to record the podcast with you. Thank you guys for listening in. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed recording it. Chris actually highlighted a very good area that needs some good improvement with tech is like the educational system. And he showed us that, you know, with the right product, the right support, the right content, and a strong belief in yourself and what you do, you can actually bring some change, you know. This guy is a mission to change a system that's been around for more than 100 years, you know. It's not a simple battle that you can win quickly. And one big takeaway that I would highlight from Chris is like, you know, he got that gut feeling at the beginning that the educational system is broken. And then he started to build a product. And after that, you know, he like start to listen a lot with to his users, you know, and he constantly balance his, you know, gut feeling and what the user wants, you know, to actually build a great product. Because if you want to bring some change, you know, sometimes you need to improvise, you need to bring some innovation, and that sometimes will not come from your user, you know. I think it's better, you know, to like do some things, show it, and get feedback rather than, you know, going to ask, you know, your user what they want, because most of the times they don't know what they want. And in the case of Chris, you know, if you would go and ask, you know, like a teacher or kids, you know, what they need, you know, to build the platform, they will never tell you, I need a platform that teach actually my teacher or the teacher how to teach coding to kids, you know. And that's a big like part of the product that Chris has, is actually all that part about teaching the teacher how to teach how to teach coding in school, you know. So we designed a platform that really cares about the teacher and their need. It's now used by, I think, 100 schools all around the world, mostly focused in APAC and Hong Kong, you know. So as usual, if you like this episode, don't hesitate to give me a rating or even send me some feedback, send me some suggestion of guests. This helps me to improve the show and bring you more valuable content every day. Thanks, guys. See you for the next episode next week.